It was the summer of 1939. Nazi Germany was at its peak. Two scientists, Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard, wrote to President FDR, warning him of the possibility of Germany successfully developing an atomic bomb. FDR took the letter seriously, and a top-secret program, codenamed Project Manhattan, was conceived. And when I say top secret, even Vice President Harry Truman didn't know of its existence. Welcome to the Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we are talking about the making of the atomic bomb, the biggest military asset of the 20th century. The story of the atomic bomb started around the turn of the century with the advent of the concept of radioactivity. The pioneers in this area included Ernest Rutherford, Niels Bohr, Pierre and Marie Curie, and Albert Einstein. And later, this group expanded to include scientists like Leo Szilard of Hungary, Otto Hahn of Germany, and Hantaro Nagaoka of Japan. By early 1900s, these scientists were studying the structure of the atom and the deflection and scattering of alpha particles. And by the 1930s, the nuclear scientists were exploring the revolutionary concept of splitting an atom of uranium with a neutron. Now, by the early 1930s, Germany was one of the centers of scientific research. But around the same time, anti-Semitism rose in Germany. And as a result of that, a lot of the scientific community who were Jews realized that the Nazis posed a deadly threat, and they began to emigrate en masse, mostly to the United States. And these emigres included Albert Einstein, Theodor von Karman, Leo Szilard, Enrico Fermi, and many others. So what is the principle behind an atomic bomb? So when a neutron strikes the nucleus of an atom of uranium-235 or plutonium-239, it causes that nucleus to split into two fragments, each of which is a nucleus with about half the protons and neutrons of the original nucleus. And when I say uranium-235 or plutonium-239, all I'm referring to is the atomic weight of that element. So uranium, which could have different atomic weights but still be uranium, we are more interested in uranium with the atomic weight of 235 and plutonium, which has the atomic weight 239. So in the process of splitting, a great amount of energy is released, and along with that, two or more neutrons are also released. And under certain conditions, the escaping neutrons strike and thus split more of the surrounding uranium nuclei, which then emit more neutrons and that split more nuclei. So this series of rapidly multiplying fissions culminates in what we call a chain reaction, and ultimately all the fissionable material is consumed. And in the process, it generates an explosion of what is known as the atomic bomb. So neutron strikes the atom, splits it, collides, strikes again, splits it, creating that chain reaction which releases a ton of energy and ultimately an explosion. That is the atomic bomb. Now, as I had mentioned earlier, Germany was the center of scientific research around that time, and fission was first discovered by German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann in 1938, and the news of the discovery spread quickly throughout the international physics community. And in the summer of 1939, a small number of physicists in the US got alarmed over the possibility of Germany successfully developing an atomic bomb and decided to warn President FDR. Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard wrote the letter, and finally a meeting took place with Roosevelt on October 11, 1939. FDR took it seriously, and in the following months there were several nuclear devoted committees that were set up in the various departments of the US government, along with focus on research and interagency coordination of results. In the spring of 1942, the decision was made to consolidate development activities in Chicago, and the objective was to produce a nuclear chain reaction by the end of the year. Enrico Fermi and all his colleagues moved from New York, where they had been using the resources of Columbia University, to commence operations on the premises of the University of Chicago. And in an abandoned University of Chicago stadium, Enrico Fermi went to the squash court to set up the equipment to start the controlled chain reaction. He assembled the components, 6 tons of uranium and 250 tons of graphite, which was being used as a moderator. And on December the 2nd, 1942, with 42 observers, a self-sustaining nuclear reaction was achieved. Now wait, what is a moderator? So you need the ability to control your chain reaction, because when you are splitting the atom and creating fast neutrons, you should be able to slow them down so that you can control the splitting process more effectively. And the moderator is used to create that slowing down effect. And the most common moderators used in nuclear chain reaction are graphite and heavy water. Around about the same time, the nuclear scientists also became aware of a new material created by neutron bombardment of uranium-238. And this material was called plutonium by its discoverer, Glenn Seaborg. And plutonium would end up having an advantage over uranium-235 in terms of greater explosive power, smaller size and weight, and easier manufacturing. Subsequently, on December 28, 1942, President Roosevelt authorized the formation of the Manhattan Project to combine all the various efforts with the goal of weaponizing nuclear energy. Now, scientists across the globe were aware of the potential of nuclear fission towards weaponization. German scientists were interested in carrying out research and looking at the potential of making an atomic bomb, but during the course of the World War II, they were handicapped by shortages in materials and funds. The interesting thing here is that Adolf Hitler somehow was not too interested when he was introduced to the concept of the atomic bomb. And there are 2 reasons given for that. One is that he was not able to comprehend the concept of nuclear fission. And the second one is that when he heard about the destruction that the atomic bomb could cause, he seemed to have lost interest because he didn't want to rule over a world which was flattened by these nuclear weapons. Also, as discussed in episode 11, Germany was desperate for oil at that time. So the nuclear bomb and the nuclear fission research was the least of the priorities. So the funding and support for nuclear research took a back seat. Interestingly though, the Americans and the Allies were not aware of this. So the work on the Project Manhattan continued in full force under the paranoid assumption that Germany was fast making a nuclear weapon. And the most paranoid among the Allies were the British, who were concerned about Germany's acquisition of heavy water produced at Vemork in southern Norway. There were several attempts made to destroy the installation, and finally, in November of 1943, an attack was made by the B-17s from the 8th Air Force, and that ended up destroying the entire plant, so much so that it had to be shut down. And post-World War II, it was revealed that this attack did ultimately hinder Germany's ability to achieve a self-sustaining atomic reactor. Japan, on the other hand, was very aware and interested in the atomic bomb. Around 1939, General Takeo Yasuda, who was the director of the Aviation Technology Research Institute of the Imperial Japanese Army, directed his aide, Lieutenant Colonel Suzuki, to prepare a report. Suzuki reported in October of 1940 and concluded that Japan had access to sufficient uranium in Korea to make an atomic bomb. Interestingly, though, in Japan, the Army, Air Force, and the Navy had moved separately towards funding and supporting nuclear research. Between December 1942 and March 1943, the Navy Committee organized a physics colloquium to come to a decision regarding the feasibility of an atomic bomb. By now, they had understood that the process would require the mining and processing of hundreds of tons of uranium ore, and the separation of U-235 would require about a tenth of Japan's available electric capacity. So it concluded that while the manufacture of the atomic bomb was possible, but it would take Japan another 10 years to build one, and it also concluded that neither Germany nor the United States had enough spare industrial capacity to manufacture the atomic bomb in time for the war. Just like Germany, Japan's main struggle was for oil. Meanwhile, back in the United States, the Manhattan Project had moved into high gear, with Colonel Leslie R. Groves appointed as the overall in charge of the Manhattan Project. One of the first major decisions of Groves was to select Oak Ridge, Tennessee to be the site for plants for isotope separation, that is to produce uranium-235 from uranium-238 in quantities sufficient to produce the atomic bomb. And in early 1943, Groves selected Hanford, Washington as the site for plutonium production. Wait, wasn't Oak Ridge already producing uranium? Then why plutonium? Well, the US was keeping its options open. Try both raw materials. Who knows what the end result may be? So you have both uranium-235 and plutonium being extracted. But where is everything coming together? Yes, that was the next major problem that Groves faced: the establishment of a laboratory to work on bomb design. But first, Groves needed to appoint the director for this laboratory. So far, Enrico Fermi had been doing all the prototyping, but Groves identified theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer as the director of this laboratory. There was some opposition to this decision, but Groves was able to convince his superiors into appointing Oppenheimer as the director. The next target was site selection, and Groves had a set of criteria that needed to be followed, like not being too close to the west coast to avoid a Japanese invasion, and the population needed to be fairly sparse to avoid any radiation exposure to the civilians. And based on this criteria, Los Alamos, New Mexico was selected as the site for the bomb manufacturing laboratory. And the laboratory was codenamed Project Y. There were two possible approaches to bomb design. One was the gun type, and the other was the implosion. The gun type was the more traditional approach and considered less risky, and here one half of the uranium was shot towards another half to initiate the chain reaction, and since it was shot linearly, it almost resembled the shape of a gun, and hence the name, the gun type. It used uranium-235, and this was the type of bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. The other, newer approach was the implosion type, and it used a ball called the core of the fissionable material surrounded by a number of lenses of explosives, which, when detonated, squeeze the ball into critical mass to initiate the chain reaction. This used plutonium, and this was the bomb that was dropped over Nagasaki. While the team of scientists was working on the bomb design, in early 1944, the Air Force started its program to develop a delivery capability using the B-29 aircraft. The B-29 was the logical choice because of its long range, high altitude performance, and the ability to carry an atomic bomb that was expected to weigh around 9,000 to 10,000 pounds. In March and June, dummy atomic bombs were dropped by the B-29s at the Muroc Army Air Force Base in California to test the release mechanism. And in August, a decision was made to train a special group to deliver the first atomic bombs, and a squadron, then based in Fairmont, Nebraska, to train for the assignment. And then, on April 12, 1945, President FDR passed away. Now, Harry Truman had no knowledge of the Manhattan Project. In fact, when Truman was doing a senatorial investigation in 1943 into war production expenditures, he ended up asking questions about a suspicious plant in Minneapolis, which was actually connected to the Manhattan Project. But he received a stern phone call from FDR's Secretary of War, Harry Stimson, warning him not to inquire further. And on April 24, 1945, Stimson himself briefed President Harry Truman on the full details of the Manhattan Project and the fact that an atomic weapon was being developed by physicists in New Mexico. And in his diary that night, Truman noted that he had been informed the US was perfecting an explosive great enough to destroy the whole world. By July of 1945, it was time to conduct a live test of the nuclear detonation. And the area on the Alamogordo bombing range, which was 200 miles south of Los Alamos, was identified as the site for the test. And on July 16, 1945, an implosion bomb using plutonium was detonated, and the yield was calculated to be 18.6 kilotons. Yes, the test was conducted on the newly developed implosion type bomb. The test was named Trinity. Around the same time as the Trinity test, the cruiser USS Indianapolis departed from San Francisco carrying most of the components of the first atomic bomb to Japan. The bomb was a gun-type bomb called Little Boy. The components of the second bomb, which was an implosion-type bomb called Fat Man, were carried to Japan by C-54 and B-29 aircraft. On August 6, 1945, almost 3 weeks after the Trinity test, the B-29 Enola Gay, carrying Little Boy and piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, dropped its first bomb on Hiroshima, destroying most of the city and causing around 140,000 deaths. On August 9, 1945, another B-29, Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, dropped Fat Man on Nagasaki. The number of deaths were 70,000, lesser than Hiroshima, primarily because of steep hills surrounding the city. And on August 15, 1945, Japanese Emperor Hirohito announced his country's surrender, ending World War II. And it is on that note that we end this segment of the program. On to the quiz section. The answer to last episode's quiz: what are the top 3 agricultural producing countries in the world? The answer is A, China, India, and the US. Question for today's episode: why was Robert J. Oppenheimer blacklisted and stripped of his job at the Atomic Energy Commission in 1954? Was it A, he was charged with being a Soviet spy? Or B, his opposition to the development of the hydrogen bomb? C, his close ties with communists? Or D, he had a falling out with President Harry Truman? Once again, why was physicist Robert J. Oppenheimer blacklisted and stripped of his job at the Atomic Energy Commission in 1954? A, he was charged with being a Soviet spy. B, his opposition to the development of the hydrogen bomb. C, his close ties with communists. Or D, he had a falling out with President Harry Truman. The answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in this episode. In the next episode, we talk about the most important issue of the current and the future generations: climate change, the issues, how we got here, and what we can do about it. Till then, stay safe and keep looking for the why in history.